It's very interesting hearing you talk about the influences on different composers, though, because we know, of course, how much Vaughan Williams loved folk music, and he and many of his colleagues at that time went and collected old English tunes, didn't they? Which, you know, one could argue you could hear in that. I mean, how much do you, in your work, how much do you pull upon sort of music of the people, if you like?
Well, I think, you know, it's very important to me to draw on all kinds of different forms. I mean, for example, I'm a flamenco guitarist. I play a lot of classical piano and jazz piano and so on, but I play a lot of flamenco and different forms of guitar as well. And flamenco, for me, is a form of music that's been elevated over time to almost a classical form. It originally was a folk form from Rajasthan in India, and it started that way, and it developed and picked up Moorish traditions, and over time, it you know, in the hands of people like Paco de Lucia or Tomatito, it became a much more elevated form. And it's interesting because originally there was a lot of protests from people like Andres Segovia, who said that he wanted to take the guitar away from the noisy hands of the flamenco guitarist. And you know, it's interesting when you see a folk form that rises above those initial prejudices against them, you know, against the musicians. I think that's wonderful.
You can find the 10 Pieces prom with a full repertoire on the BBC iPlayer and online. Still to come on Proms Extra, a look at A Child of Our Time by Tippett and a performance by cellist Oliver Coates. Now, Nitin, a question for you. When you started composing, did you feel like you were breaking down boundaries?
I think when you're composing a piece, you don't think about the aftermath of of what happens when you've composed it or when it's heard. You're just thinking about the feeling at the time, and you have to be very present-minded and really follow the flow of what you feel. It's different if you're writing for a commission or if you're writing for yourself, it's just about a flow of feeling and channeling what is around you and trying to give it a voice.
Do you label yourself as a certain type of composer? Are you a classical contemporary composer?
I hate labels. I mean, but I suppose you know, I've worked in so many different genres, and I work in film, I work in television, I work as a composer, you know, for classical orchestras as well. I've done lots of different things, so I don't really like labels. I mean, I like working as a DJ as well, so it doesn't, you know, labels just restrict your imagination and possibility.
Well, you'll like this next film. There continues to be a new wave of young contemporary composers emerging who are making classical music their own way. And Proms Extra hit the decks with one composer in particular.
Classical music is such an important part of human culture in the whole world now, but often it feels like it's hiding itself in a bit of a bubble and has become a kind of historical art form for some people or a highbrow academic art form for others. I see myself as a classical composer. I'm writing music that reflects the world I live in. I want to share it with my peer group. And so the solution for me was to put it on in clubs and bars where most people go for music. And instantly the public's more relaxed and they don't feel like they have to behave in any particular way. And if they don't like the piece, they're not stuck in a seat, they can just go to the bar and get a drink. When you bring in electronics into classical music, it's important that you make it interactive with the live performers. So with the cello multitracks, the score has freedom in it. It just tells the cellist to play certain phrases, which is actually imitating sounds of recorded cello, and then I then imitate the live cello back. So it's this circular feedback loop between us. I'm not trying to make pop music dressed up with a classical instrumentation. I'm more interested in the deeper essence or energy of contemporary culture and how that, and taking that on board into a serious classical composition. people always ask me, they said, oh, would your grandfather have approved of you using electronic instruments? You know, would he have, do you think he would have made electronic music? When we look at the history of classical music, you see technology evolving. You know, Mozart wrote his clarinet concerto for early models of the clarinet. We're always looking for new sounds. I think that's just totally natural that a composer will, when there's a new way of making sounds, they'll take that on board. So I think there is this new strand of classical music that's connecting with electronic music that's perhaps, you know, has a closer connection with contemporary life as well and contemporary culture.
That was composer Gabriel Prokofiev, whose work is also featured in the 10 Pieces Prom, is one of many classical composers doing it their way. And Tom, did that resonate with you, hearing Gabriel talk about his inspiration and what he's trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's really important for composers to stay current and to stay engaged in your community and to really sort of demystify the compositional process. It's really an important thing for us to do this, and I have utmost respect for Gabriel to be doing this. And I know a lot of my colleagues from the Royal Northern College of Music also have similar sort of nights where they put on contemporary music in pubs, clubs, and venues where you wouldn't expect contemporary music to be. And I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think it is the future.
Oh. Nitin, do you feel there's an appetite for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm really into decontextualization. If you decontextualize classical music, you hear it in a different way, and you come to it with a different perspective. And I think if you make it more accessible to people who wouldn't come across it otherwise. I mean, years ago, I remember I'd written a piece for the Britten Sinfonia, and a few days later, I was DJing at a club called Fabric in London. And I remember there was a guy who was dancing in front of me. He said, "Oh, I saw you with the Britten Sinfonia a few days ago." And I thought that was great, because there was somebody who would actually come and seen something that was totally different. And I like that idea that that people can engage in lots of different ways with music and don't have those kind of preconceptions that music is only, you know, certain types of music can be only for a certain audience.
And so I understand you studied electronic music. Back in the day.
Back in the day, yeah, it was in the day. It was in the late 70s. So when I went to City University, and the degree there included an element of electronic music. So, but I mean, there was nothing digital about it really at that point. So we're talking about tapes and cutting tapes and splicing tapes and that. But there were some really cutting-edge composers at the time. Alejandro Vignall, who's an Argentinian composer, was there. Simon Emerson was one of our tutors, and they were all very involved in the contemporary music scene. And I got very involved also in the contemporary music scene, but not necessarily electronics. But we did work alongside them at that time.
Because you do a lot of contemporary repertoire. I know that you're working constantly with composers on new works, aren't you?
I have done a lot of contemporary music, yes, and it's a huge challenge. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe I won't. No, yes, I will actually, because it's great to feel that you're part of a new history of music, actually. And
do you notice an evolving sound world? Do you think that there are real changes you could sort of document, if you like?
Well, actually, in recent times, it's come back to being more melodic. Contemporary music, I find. I don't know whether you think the same thing, but there was a point when it became quite obscure and not very helpful to listeners, really. And now I think there are elements of. It doesn't mean that it's easier for listeners, but it challenges them in a different way.
I also like it when, you know, with people like Gabriel Prokofiev, you know, where he's mixing electronic music with classical music and live players. I really like that, because it's a natural evolution from. I mean, people who compose would know packages on computers called Logic or Sibelius, where you'll actually use these to compose for orchestras, but they also allow you to bring in other sounds and other kind of flavors into your work. And orchestra, and it's inevitable that that happens. And sometimes you want to blend the two, and I find myself doing that more and more.
It's also nice to see something active as well. I mean, there used to be a time when electronic music, you'd sit in the audience and just listen to it. But there's actually more to see as well. People working at it and doing it live, which I think is incredibly exciting and much more involving for the audience.
It must be because the technology's so incredible now. I mean, you moved on from the tape that you were doing. I mean, I dabble in it a bit, but you can do anything with the electronic music.
Yes.
Absolutely anything.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think that's why it's such a good 10 pieces piece. You're showing young people how kind of cool an orchestra can be. And I use that word in the best possible way. You can show that it's the crossover between the two works so well.
Yes.
I think that's why it's such a good piece for 10 pieces.
I agree.